And this. Why don't we start with Brandon Aiyuk?
Let's do it.
Because I think Aiyuk's kind of interesting. I'm going to share the screen. This was Willard and Dibbs on 95.7 The Game today with Bucky Brooks. And you know Bucky, and Bucky's really solid. Went to North Carolina, great guy. Here's
right. I think you should.
Here is Bucky Brooks with Willard and Dibbs talking a little bit of Aiyuk, and then we'll comment on it. Here it is.
$50 million into these two players based on the skill set that they've shown, at least so far. So if that's the case, what would you do?
Well, I don't know if you have to do anything right now with Brandon Aiyuk. Like, I know there's a rush, but, like, he still has the fifth-year option to play on, right? I think he still has the fifth-year option before he's not free. So what you do is you make him play on the option, and then eventually you figure it out. Because let's be honest, after next year, they're going to have to reset the entire program. Because after next year, they're going to have to pay the quarterback if the quarterback continues to play like that. So once you pay the quarterback, you can't pay everybody else. And so that's the time where you have to reset the entire team.
Yeah, but Bucky, he's not showing up without a new deal.
Okay, you know what happens?
Yeah,
man, this is why. Because Mark, you're so nice. But guess what? The CBA has things in it where if he doesn't show up, it would be very punitive to his pocketbook.
I understand.
So we can sit here and act like that, and we can play tough like, no, we got to pay him or he won't show up. If you're not in a situation where you can pay everybody, you just have to hold off and you got to wait and see, because you're going to have to make a determination. It's going to be Debo or Brandon Aiyuk, because when you pay the quarterback, because Brock is not going to pay for less than $1 million in his fourth year, you're going to have to pay him. And so when he gets up into that $40-50 million range, somebody has to suffer. So I don't know if I could pay him right now, because you still got others, unless you're going to cut Eric Armstead, reduce his number down. So then you have Brandon Aiyuk. So all of that stuff plays with it.
All right, a little bit of Bucky Brooks talking Brandon Aiyuk, and Peter King was on later in the day, and basically, also commented on Aiyuk, and he said, the 49ers, he kind of said what Bucky said, which is that the Niners have time to make a decision, and that they're going to have to make their major decisions as far as their roster really next offseason. They could kick the can down the road this offseason and kind of float everything into next year and just try to run it back. The question is Aiyuk willing to put off his big payday? Willard referenced there that he could hold out. And Bucky shot back with, if he holds out, he'll be fined, and eventually he'll come in and play. So Bucky said, I wouldn't trade Aiyuk. It's very difficult to have two high-priced wide receivers. If the Niners pay Aiyuk what I think he's worth, they're going to have $50 million in wide receivers. Bucky also pointed out in this interview that the Niner wide receivers really struggled to get open versus press man coverage against Kansas City, against L'Jarius Sneed and Trent McDuffie. And he said that neither Aiyuk nor Debo are polished route runners, and that the Niners, they don't win against elite corners. Debo gets number one wide receiver money right now, and Aiyuk definitely. You could push it to next year, but he's probably going to get number one wide receiver money. Why don't we start right there? If you're the 49ers, and then there's other people suggesting that maybe they trade Aiyuk or trade Debo. The question is, obviously, I think everybody would rather, if it comes down to Aiyuk or Debo, I think most people would rather have Aiyuk than Debo. But Aiyuk is going to fetch a lot more in a trade market situation, maybe a first-round pick, maybe multiple picks, including a first-rounder, compared to Debo, who already makes $28 million, has had a bunch of injuries, and probably nets you a third, a fourth, or a fifth-round pick in return. What do you think, Raj? Why don't we start right there? The big decisions the Niners need to make. We'll start with Brandon Aiyuk. What are you going to do?
Yeah, that's off-season priority number one, the player that everybody's talking about. He's already kind of using the tactics that we thought he would eventually a couple days after the Super Bowl. I kind of thought that was crazy. His girl's out there talking, his friend on IG's talking. Like, this is the stuff Debo did. He learned from Debo. I expect him to take the same route, scrub the social media, all that stuff. Like, I'm not worried about all that stuff. I know it's going to happen, but that's just, negotiations. Wide receivers, that's how they negotiate in the market. I saw on Sport Track they're expecting him to make 23 million a year at least. That's probably what he's looking to fetch, and that's the wide receiver market. Now, can they pay him this year and figure it out? I think they can. I think that's what he wants. I think he wants to get paid now rather than later. I think Bucky makes a good point in saying, hey, he probably will hold out if he doesn't get a big payday. He's a big time part of this offense. $14 million for his 5th year option. I think he wants more, so I could see him holding out, whatever the case is. That gets a little tricky, I hope it doesn't get messy because he may suffer in terms of his ability to play on the field. We've seen it with Bosa, Debo, Warner, where they kind of fell off a little bit in the beginning, and then it took them some time to get back, if you don't train. So that's something the 49ers have to kind of look at, but they've been doing this for years. They kind of hold off, wait till training camp, and it's the Niner way. So there's that situation. And you did mention, will they carry 2 receivers for 50 million? Debo's at 28 million. Will they restructure and extend him and then save some money? Will they restructure Ark Armstead? There's so many guys that they could restructure. Right now, I think they have the leeway to make this contract work because you mentioned they don't have Brock Purdy on a big contract, but they will eventually, especially if he plays the way he did this year. So they got a lot of questions, man. And I think part of it is who else is going to be a casualty. It's not just Aiyuk. Like they might have to get rid of someone to keep Aiyuk. I think there's got to be a casualty made, to keep Aiyuk. And, this kind of reminds me of the Armstead DeForest Buckner situation. They had 2 highly touted guys on their team. He wanted to keep them both. They're big parts of the defense. And they had to make a decision. And the decision was you trade Defoe because he's a higher trade value. So if you're looking at, Debo, Aiyuk, like you said, it makes more sense to trade Brandon Aiyuk because he could probably get you a first, maybe multiple. A couple years back when Debo was going for his extension, you could have traded him for a first, but now you're not going to get much out of him. But I know a lot of people say trade Debo, trade Debo. And Debo is really important to this offense. And Kyle loves Debo. I don't care what you like. I don't care what I like. I don't care what Joe down the street likes. It's up to Kyle. This is his offense. And during the Super Bowl, Debo Samuel had more targets. If you look at the season, I know Debo missed some games. He had 12 touchdowns compared to Brandon Aiyuk. He had over 1,100 yards total yards of scrimmage. Brandon Aiyuk had 13. He had a very great season, over 1,300 yards receiving, 31st in total targets, 7th in total receptions. So his efficiency is outstanding. He's great. And that is what Ayuk's going to probably tell Kyle and the guys when he's negotiating, say, hey, look, you put me on any other team, I'm their number 1 target. I'll probably have Justin Jefferson numbers. So Aiyuk does have a lot to argue. But then again, there's a lot of weapons on the 49ers. So I can see this going either way, Larry. I can see the people that say that they're going to trade him being true because they did it with Defoe. I could see people saying, don't worry, they're going to get it taken care of because they've done it before. But this is an interesting one this year because they are kind of in this weird position where they need to keep the core of this team to get back to the Super Bowl next year. And Ayuk's very important because you can't just replace Brandon Aiyuk with any rookie. I know there's some good rookies out there, but you said that, their routes they're not the most polished route runners. Maybe Debo's not the most polished route runner. I think Brandon Aiyuk is he's probably one of the best route runners in the league. That's what a lot of people say. Now, the problem was in the Super Bowl, yeah, he was locked up by some great corners. I think the offensive line was an issue that didn't allow him to, develop his routes fully. So with that being said, yes, Brandon Aiyuk is a major priority. They need to fix the offensive line so they can utilize Aiyuk. And I think the final thing I want to say is when Aiyuk goes into his negotiations, I think he needs to tell Kyle, like, look, I want the ball. I don't care if Debo is your guy because I think that's the one issue between Aiyuk and Debo. Debo's vocal. We've heard so many times where he says, give me the ball, give me the damn ball, give me the damn ball. How many times have you heard that? I don't think I've ever heard Aiyuk say, give me the ball during the game. I don't know if you have interviewed him, but do you feel like he commands that? He needs to be an alpha.
Part of the reason I think he blends in so well is that he doesn't demand the ball. He's a workman-like, put your head down kind of guy. He blocks in the run game, and he's really dependable. I think this is going to be very difficult for the 49ers to extend him. I mean, just look around the NFL and look at what's going on with wide receivers in this league. Devontae Adams wanted a deal. He got dealt. Tyreek Hill wanted a new deal. He got dealt. A.J. Brown wanted a new deal. Guess what happened to A.J. Brown? He got dealt. And the wide receiver, I mean, Barnwell or Graziano or one of these guys on ESPN today kind of highlighted, or maybe it was yesterday, that the wide receiver extension market has not really moved a whole lot. It's been tough for teams to find common ground with wide receivers. Minnesota has yet to sign Justin Jefferson long term. Dallas hasn't signed CeeDee Lamb long term. Pittman Jr. is not signed long term. T. Higgins is now testing the free agent market. And so it's difficult to project what an extension may look like for Aiyuk unless the Niners are willing to kind of blow him out of the water with a dramatic overpay. That's not Parag's way. So I think the Niners may want to wait and see this market to define itself a little bit more so they know what they're dealing with. But at the same time, doing an Aiyuk extension right now could actually help the Niners. Right? I mean, he's making $14.1 million this year in his fifth-year option. That's also happens to be his cap number. And if they extend him, they might be able to have him on the books for like $4 million this year, and free up $10 million. So it's kind of a matter of how do they choose to go about this. And then you get the feeling, because of the rhetoric coming out of the Aiyuk camp with his siblings and some of the stuff that's been put out there, that he is not going to be in a good mental state if they ask him to come back next year and play on the fifth-year extension, on the fifth-year option at 14.1. I mean, he'll make his 14.1 million, but I don't, and Peter King makes the great point that most great wide receivers get one major payday. So he's waiting on his major payday. Peter also mentioned that, look at Kansas City. They traded Tyreek Hill to Miami, and what did they do afterwards? They won the last two Super Bowls, and they haven't had a 1,000-yard receiver in either of the last two seasons, and it hasn't hurt them. They found a way to win the Super Bowl without Tyreek Hill. And now they do have Mahomes and Andy Reid and some other great players for sure, but so I mean, how do you play your hand if you're the Niners here? You pay this guy and hope that whatever you give him is basically market value in a market that's kind of undefined. Do you make him wait for another year and say, hey, look, next year's the year we're going to pay Brock. Next year's the year we're really going to have to take a hard look at our team across the board. Let's try to run it back this year. We'll pay you the 14.1 and we'll do it next year. What do you think how do you think they're going to play their hand?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think part of that whole situation has to deal with Brock Purdy. And I feel like his continued growth relies on a guy like Aiyuk, because they have that great chemistry. Brandon Aiyuk's the younger receiver of the group between him and Debo and everybody. I mean, Debo's a great veteran, but he's not going to be there after 2020. Like his contract's kind of airing up, cleaning up. He signed a 3-year extension because his hope was he can get another big extension after the 3 years. And the injuries have hurt him, but in Kyle's offense, he's very vital. I know he couldn't separate in the Super Bowl and he was kind of clamped up, but Kyle loves Debo. They don't win without Debo. So I think Brandon Aiyuk, again, he has to be vocal. And I think there's going to be rumors, there's going to be reports in the next couple of weeks or whatever that Brandon Aiyuk, maybe it's Brandon or the team. You're going to hear some type of report, combines next week, of Brandon Aiyuk possibly trading, a trade rumor. I know it's going to happen. It's the offseason. It's going to happen. There's going to be reports, and they might look into it. They might look into what are the options we can get for Brandon Aiyuk, because you're right. If it doesn't make sense for them financially, they're going to have to figure out what can we get in return for Aiyuk. Is it fair enough, compensation wise? Because after this year, they're gonna have to look You have to look at this team and say, okay, Brock Purdy's got to get paid. Who's going to stay? Who's going to go? How are we going to keep this team to keep them contending in the playoffs? And who knows if Trent Williams is going to be there, George Kittle, and all these guys are getting older. So I'm sure they're going to explore that option. And I know the report yesterday from ESPN was, I think the report said, I can't remember, it was the ESPN guy, and he basically said the most likely outcome, the prediction he had was 49ers might trade Brandon Aiyuk for those reasons. So I'm sure they're going to explore. I think ultimately the 49ers figure out a way to pay him and make it work in the books. But I think it's going to have to deal with, extending players and renegotiating contracts. Armstead, if they can extend, Mooney Ward, that probably opens up some cap space. Hufanga and Greenlaw, although he probably would have got extended if he was healthy, that becomes a little tricky. So I think it really depends on the guys they want to stick around, guys that are willing to take pay cuts. Maybe Trent Williams takes another, upfront guarantee money bonus like he did last year, open up some cap space. I'm sure there's ways they can open up that money, but they have to really determine if Brandon Ayuk's the guy they want to build this team around. Because after this year, Debo is probably gone in a year or two, right? So do they feel that Ayuk is the leader of this clubhouse in terms of wide receiver? And that's what Kyle has to find out. Ultimately, Larry, I think they do figure it out, but I think it's going to be long, drawn out saga like it always is. And I hate that because it's just the way the 49ers operate. Parag and everybody, they push things down to the end. They kick the can, like you said, and then we're sitting here with the most dramatic offseason.